she's in stealth right now, so she's probably coming back here. No, she's gonna get grabbed. She's gonna get grabbed. Shocking. Eugen, can you do something? What are we doing? Hey, maybe just standing around and waiting for me to die isn't the best thing you could be doing with your time. Just saying. I mean, hypothetically. Okay, somehow this is the first gen that's gotten done, which is not a good sign. I don't know what... Oh, let me go find out what Dwight's doing. Dwight, are you lost? What are we doing, Dwight? Oh, he's booning totems. Oh, Jesus. What is she doing? Why is she just standing still? I don't understand. I don't get it. She has not moved. I don't know what's going on. But I kind of want to stay just to witness the madness that's unfolding in front of me this game. Oh. I see. He's just BMing. How has behavior not fixed this yet, by the way? Solo queue. Solo queue can be one of the worst experiences in Dead by Daylight. There's no sugarcoating it, it's pretty rough. There are so many different features of DBD that work against players who aren't loading into matches with friends that it's honestly baffling that some people commit to playing only Survivor. In my mind, that's like shaving my balls with a cheese grater. At least with Killer, you can kind of control the match and are solely responsible for whether or not you win games, but with Survivor, not so much. I might be in the mood to play some Survivor by myself, but that only ends up lasting for like a match or two. I mean, there's only so much of watching Meg hide in a corner that a fella can stand. Sometimes, all it can take is one random player throwing the match to ruin my mood, whether it be a Survivor giving up on hook, disconnecting, being AFK, or just not engaging with the match like a normal player. There's nothing more frustrating than watching a winnable match turn into 20 minutes of just nothing. If you're lucky, you'll get sacrificed quickly and can go next, but if not, you'll end up slugged in the ground for 4 minutes as the clown main looks for the Nia that's been locker hopping all game. I don't think anyone will argue that solo queue can be miserable at times and is, without a doubt, the weakest role in the game, but why is that, and more importantly, how do we fix it? So, what separates solo queue from Survive with Friends? When people talk about the Survivor side, you'll normally hear things like, "Oh, Swift is so overpowered and the game is Survivor side because of it," but when they talk about solo Survivor, nobody really makes that claim. What's the difference? Well, the obvious answer is information. Information is the most important thing in Dead by Daylight. Where are the other survivors? Where's the killer? What perks do they all have? What pallets have been used? What generators are the other survivors planning on working on? These and more are all questions that can be easily answered by just being in a Discord call with your friends. In solo queue, however, you have none of this information unless you have specific perks to get it. This is why, in my opinion, information perks like Bond, Kindred, Windows of Opportunity will always be better in solo queue than exhaustion perks are. What good is Light or Sprint Burst if you have no pallets to run to because Dwight threw them all down the second he heard the terror radius? Information, being as important as it is in DBD, is what separates solo queue from Survive with Friends, and even what separates good comp teams from great comp teams. If you're consistently being filled in on what's happening in the game, you'll know exactly where to run to and, more importantly, where to not run. Just leading a killer to your teammates can sometimes cause you to lose a game if one of them is on death hook or they're unable to finish a generator. In Survive with Friends, that doesn't really happen. If a group of friends is taking the game pretty seriously and is actively trying to win, the killer will probably have a very difficult time, especially if they're playing a weaker killer. Meanwhile, sometimes the weakest killers have the easiest time against solo queue players. Stealth killers like Ghostface and Wraith can be pretty rough against teams, but are great against regular players, showing how much a difference callouts can make for matches. Against teams, the killer can get hooks really quickly, but if the survivors are doing a good job of spreading out and managing their time, it doesn't really matter. At least in most cases. Sometimes you can play a strong killer who has a lot of map control and squeak out a win, but that's more on the rare side of things and is very dependent on the map you get. The lack of information isn't just limited to macro play either. Because of how weird and inconsistent Dead by Daylight skill-based matchmaking is, and try to say that 5 times really fast, by the way, you have no idea whether your teammates are going to know what planet they're on or not. I can't even begin to count the amount of times I've been in a match with one player who's cracked and another who's only got a couple hundred hours on the game. There's just no consistency. As we all know, Survivor MMR is attached to escapes, which means a player who rats all game and manages to get the hatch will sometimes be in a lobby with someone who's actually really good at the game and manages to escape a lot. This obviously leads to a lot of frustration on the better player's side. They can try their ass off to win the match, but because one or more of the survivors are just hiding and getting downed, it doesn't really matter what the other player does, which causes them to sink lower and lower into Dead by Daylight skill-based matchmaking. Oh, man, that's hard to say. I can make a whole video talking about why Dead by Daylight's matchmaking system is complete dog water, but that's a topic for a different day. When you're playing with your friends, you know how good they are and whether or not they'll sandbag you. I'm the friend that sandbags, by the way. You don't want to play Dead by Daylight with me. When you're in a random lobby with a bunch of random people, you don't know whether or not they're going to even try, which leads me to something else. I was gonna have to talk about it someday, so here goes. The Go Next epidemic. This problem is pretty much solely limited to solo queue, unless the people in question are just bad friends. I mean, I've rarely seen my friends give up unless they're doing it for a joke, but maybe this is more of a problem in other friend groups. I have no idea. The Go Next epidemic refers to the shocking amount of people that give up, either by dying on hook or disconnecting even though the match is still winnable. Typically, they'll do this because they don't like going against a specific killer or because they just don't feel like trying. This issue is straight up making solo Survivor unplayable for me. I can handle bad teammates most of the time, but I can't do anything about someone who just gives up almost immediately. Pretty much half my games, I see someone give up on kill or in Survivor. In certain cases, I get it. If one gen has been done and there's 2 survivors on death hook, it makes sense. A little bit. I personally still like to try even in the worst situations, but I understand why some people might not care enough to try winning an unwinnable game. I understand. What I can't understand is the amount of people that give up the second they get downed. What's up with that? Stop doing it. Would you think you're gonna get a 5-gen chase against a blight? Good luck. The number of times this happens in a normal DBD session for me is unforgivable. I know it's not just me. I know this is happening to a lot of other people, so what's the deal? Why are players just giving up and ruining the match for everybody else? In my mind, and what seems to be the general consensus among players, is that the main reason has to be burnout and a lack of consequences. Some players might be so tired of going against certain killers that they just want to go next in order to re-roll the killer they're facing, for lack of a better term. Thanks to behavior removing the ability to lose a pip, there's no consequences for just dying on hook. I mean, you get less BP, but who cares about that? I mean, sure, there's a consequence for disconnecting now, but sometimes it doesn't even matter. People are more than willing to eat a short disconnect penalty than stay in a game they don't want to play. Keeping that in mind, the first 2 disconnect penalties are 1 minute and 5 minutes, which typically are shorter than most DBD games, which just reinforces this terrible mindset for people that don't have a backbone. This problem is especially bad for certain killers that the community deems unfun. You want to play twins? Good luck. In the mood to play Knight or Chucky? Better luck next time. You want to run a match or 2 of Skull Merchant? Pfft, enjoy your PvE game mode. For Christ's sake, she doesn't even do anything anymore. This problem has gotten so astonishingly bad that I don't think I've lost more than 1 or 2 Nemesis games in the last 3 months. People have just collectively decided that they no longer like Nemesis after the buff, so now I have to deal with players just giving up the second they get downed. This problem affects survivors and killers equally. I don't know anyone that feels happy winning while playing killer because one guy decided he didn't want to try that match. Enjoy your participation trophy. I feel heated. Let me calm down a bit. What's interesting to me is that I don't see killer players doing this at all. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've seen a killer disconnect from the game before it ends. Maybe that's because the only way they can really give up is by disconnecting and they'll have to eat the penalty. There's no way to concede a match as a killer. You kind of just have to wait until the survivors do the generators and then force them out. Plus, most of the time, even if there's 1 generator left, the game might still be winnable. Because killers typically have the most influence over how a match goes, again, it depends on how good the survivors in the map are, I guess it makes more sense that they'd be willing to try, even if it's not looking too favorable for them. However, whether or not the killer is losing doesn't really matter if one survivor decides they don't want to play anymore. Playing against a 3v1 as a killer is always a winnable scenario just based on how match pressure works in Dead by Daylight. All it takes is one survivor throwing the match to ruin everyone else's game. Between the hard information diff between solo survivor and survive with friends, the lack of consistent player skill, and some gamers just refusing to play, it seems like, to me, solo queue is in the worst state it's been in a while, which is shocking considering how much Survivor has gotten to help them over the years. Base kit borrowed time, the anti-face cam mechanic, the really good UI changes. There's so much that's been improved, but the issue has only gotten worse. And why is that? Truth is, I don't know. How do you fix an issue that's almost entirely on the player? You can give solo queue as much information as possible, but that won't automatically make it a better experience all around, and even then, would that make killer unfun to play if every game felt like you're going against a strong survive with friends? It seems like a lose-lose scenario no matter what they do. In a world where everyone complains about how strong Swift can be, any buffs to solo queue would instantly make Survive with Friends stronger, which would just fuel the us versus them flames that the DBD community has enough of. Let's start with the first one. Lack of information. I do think this is something that will just get better over time. I've heard there are still some improvements coming to solo queue in this regard, so I guess we'll have to play the waiting game. There will always be DBD content creators out there to give people a better understanding of the game, so there is that at least. Hopefully we'll continue to get more information for the players in solo queue who need it, and hopefully the solution won't be the classic let's fix it with perks behavior special. As for inconsistent player skill, I think DBD just generally needs an overhaul of their matchmaking system. At the end of the day, ranks in DBD used to do a much better job of pairing people up with that of equal skill, which is something that's baffling considering how that system used to work. The fact you can't lose pips anymore and ranks only really matter in terms of how much BP you get every month makes the system practically useless. We just simply don't have enough information about skill-based matchmaking to determine whether or not it's doing what it's supposed to, and given how it seems to work based on what we know, it's not a good system. Or at least a system that's not built on the correct foundation. It's a topic I think really needs to be looked at, and now that Behavior is doing a better job of listening to player feedback and not being nearly as stubborn as they used to be, maybe we'll get a rework of that system down the line. I haven't heard any news of it though, so I'm not too hopeful. The emblem system was a step in the right direction, I think, but they need to understand what actually determines skill in a game like DBD. Obviously, if you loop the killer the entire game and die at the end, you aren't a bad player whatsoever, but because Behavior says you are, it reinforces selfish gameplay. A bad matchmaking system makes solo queue so much worse because it pairs you up with players you have no business playing with, which creates a cycle of good players being forced further and further down the pipeline, which creates burnout. Speaking of which, what do we do about people giving up? Well, there's no exact fix for this, I'm afraid. At the end of the day, this is just based on player morale. Behavior adds new killers all the time, so it isn't a lack of new content that's making people give up more. And you obviously don't want to nerf every killer into oblivion because a group of annoying asshats don't want to try against a handful of killers. By the way, we'll get more into this whenever I make an update on my Skull Merchant video. Maybe removing the DC penalty and reinforcing that to give players bots instead of dead teammates would help? I don't know. That whole thing is kind of a slippery slope. Regardless, there needs to be more punishment for people that ruin matches for others, or at least compensation for players that do genuinely try to stick it to the end. Maybe upgrading the prop system would make it better? The issue is that there's no real answer, and I don't know if Behavior is really talking about this behind the scenes. It isn't the new players that are giving up, that's for sure. It's a veteran player problem, and where do you even start with that? What do you tackle first? Well, for one, I'd reintroduce the pip loss. The fact that nothing you do can cause you to lose rank progress is way too forgiving and makes the whole system a joke. I personally would start there if I were Behavior. I'm interested to see if they ever bring this issue up, and if so, how they'll address it, but it needs to be sooner rather than later because I don't see this issue getting any better anytime soon, and it's really making it hard to play Survivor without my friends, who I can at least expect to piss me off. I don't know, but maybe someday we'll get an answer. Hopefully in a year, I can make another video talking about how they managed to fix this. That's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.